Hi, my name is Tyler Mincer, and I'm a graduate student at NC State's MAT program, and I'm also a huge nerd. So, a couple of months ago, I decided I wanted to learn how to play a new strategy game. My girlfriend and I had been playing a deck building game called Dominion, and while we both enjoyed it, once we got over the initial beginner threshold, we realized that the game offers little in the way of actual strategy and interaction with the other player. Essentially, we were racing each other to the finish line independent of what the other person was doing, which wasn't very fun. So I started looking into other games. When I was in middle school, I started playing Magic the Gathering, which is a fantasy-based collectible card game where each player starts with 20 life and uses spells, creatures, enchantments, and artifacts to try and reduce the other player's life to zero. I loved and still love Magic, but unfortunately it's really expensive, often with competitive decks costing well over $1,000. Being on a student budget meant that this wasn't going to happen. But luckily for me, Magic's creator, Richard Garfield, also created a game called Netrunner, and Fantasy Flight Games used their living card game model to release cards, which means that whenever you buy a pack of cards, you get all of the copies of every card in that set instead of randomly, like when you open packs of Magic the Gathering cards. Unlike the fantasy world of Magic the Gathering, Netrunner is cyberpunk themed. And I have to be honest, I tend to gravitate towards fantasy, not science fiction. But the general consensus of the gaming community was that Netrunner is an amazing game, and plays even better than Magic the Gathering. So I decided to buy the core set, which costs about $25. Well, I instantaneously fell in love with the game, and the theming was amazing. The basic premise of the game is that in the future, there are a number of huge corporations with the wealth and power of governments, and their objective is to advance agendas either through advertisement or products.
In a future
We locked on him.
where those who control the information control the world.
There is, however, an underground movement of hackers who use advanced technologies and resources to break through the security system of the corporations and steal their agendas. So unlike other games, each player is trying to win using different strategies. It's what's known as an asymmetrical game. But even though each player has a different role, in order for the game to be fun and challenging, players have to interact with the objectives of each other. Being the corporation, the player has to protect his or her servers from the hacker, and the hacker has to use the resources at his or her disposal to try and circumvent and sabotage the corporation. It occurred to me in a recent class that I could use this idea of asymmetry to improve my classroom. We discussed our experiences as students in middle and high school, and from baby boomers to millennials, most of our instruction was drill and kill. A couple of students, and I felt fortunate enough to be included in this population, could recall times or assignments that did challenge and engage us. So what exactly does this have to do with Netrunner? Well, I can think about my classroom being the corporation with me as the CEO. And I can see how trying to advance my objectives tied to learning outcomes and standards might not necessarily align with students' objectives, but they have to interact with them regardless because, well, they're students in my classroom. And if they're the hackers trying to negotiate, circumvent, and steal those objectives and outcomes, this puts them in a position of having to learn when they might not want to. And I have to wonder, is this a positive and healthy learning dynamic? I mean, after all, this is exactly what John Dewey criticized about over 100 years ago. And yet, things haven't changed much in education if my classmates' responses are any indication. But we keep making additions to the schoolhouse through Common Core state standards, No Child Left Behind, high-stakes testing, when the foundation itself might be rotting. And that's what you need to fix. But I do think there's hope, and if you'll stick with me, I think the mechanics of Netrunner can serve as an accurate metaphor and have helped me reconceptualize the relationship between students and professional educators. I did leave out an important piece, by the way, about how the game is played. Each player isn't subjected to playing the same role over and over and over again. Rather, players switch roles. So the hacker becomes the corporation and vice versa. In my classroom, putting students at the helm of their own curriculum and objectives is what I think is needed because they're the ones most affected by it. In this way, I realize how I can transform my classroom so that it's not students versus the teacher, but rather everybody understanding and responding to the other because there's role transparency. And much like students thinking about the tools and strategies they use to interpret complex texts, this environment would engage social metacognitive skills. That is, asymmetry creates a new and inventive way of responding to and collaborating with different populations. And just like in Netrunner, if you know how to play the corporation and the hacker, and you understand the rules and strategies of both, then the quality of the game improves because it's more challenging and fun for everybody.